Hello, this is the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Thank you so much for tuning in as we go through solving quadratic equations. So note that a quadratic equation has an x squared term somewhere. So we might be looking at equations like x squared equals 4. Now, if we try and solve x squared equals 4, the idea of solving is the same. We want to find a number that we can substitute for x to make the statement true. It turns out for this particular equation, there are two solutions. If I substitute x equals 2, I will get a true statement. If I substitute x is minus 2, I get a true statement. So there are two solutions to this equation. So that's something new that never happened in linear equations. In linear equations, there was only one and only one solution. For quadratic equation, there are actually 0, 1, or 2 solutions. We'll look at the examples where there are no solutions in later lessons. So all the ones that I do today, they'll either have 1 or 2 solutions, but don't worry, you'll be able to tell whether they have 1 or 2 solutions. Okay? So the idea when we're doing quadratic equations is that we want to factorize and use what's called the null factor law, and I'll explain that in a second. I want you to understand we don't solve quadratic equations like linear equations. We're always going to follow these steps. So the first step will sometimes be done for you, sometimes won't. You want to get one side equal to 0. The second step is going to be factorized. That's why we did so much factorizing. And the third step is use the null factor law. So the null factor law is something very logical. It says that if you have two things, let's call them A and B, that multiply to 0, either the first thing is equal to 0 or the second thing is equal to 0. And that is where we get the two solutions from, okay? It doesn't work for any other number. If two numbers multiply to 4, you can't say what one of the numbers has to be. But if two things multiply to 0, either the first thing equals 0 or the second thing equals 0, or perhaps even both, okay? Let's follow these 3 steps for every quadratic equation that you come to, and you'll be fine. Let's look at an example. So let's have something like x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Now, please do not try to solve this like a linear equation. Don't subtract 4 from both sides and then divide by 4. You will be there all day and you will get nowhere. That is how we solved equations in term 1 that were linear equations, but because of this x squared term, it makes things more tricky. Follow this process here. So first step, getting one side equal to 0 has already been done for us. So I'm going to go to the second step. I'm going to factorize this expression. So when you have a quadratic trinomial, remember you factorize, we've got 2 brackets, put an x in each bracket. I've got to find 2 numbers that multiply to 4, also here add to 4. So those numbers are 2 and 2. So I put them in the brackets. So x plus 2 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. That's the second step done. I've now factorized. The null factor law says that if I have something times something equals 0, the first something equals 0, or the second something equals 0. In fact, in this case, they're both exactly the same thing. So if x plus 2 equals 0, that is a linear equation, and we solve it using linear principles. Subtract 2 from both sides. That's the solution. This one only has one solution because, of course, if I solve this equation here, I get the same thing. X is minus 2. So that's it. I'm done. X is minus 2 is the solution to it. Let's look at another example. So let's say I have x squared plus 9x equals minus 20, okay? It's got an x squared term. That means it's a quadratic equation. I'm not going to try and, get x by itself. It just won't work. So first step, I need to get one side equal to 0. So in this case, I am going to add 20 to both sides, just so one side is equal to 0. I'm not trying to get x by itself. Okay, if it was a linear equation, we wouldn't add 20 to the side where x is. So now I get x squared plus 9x plus 20. minus 20 plus 20 is 0. That's why I did it. First step done. Second step, I need to factorize. So this again is a trinomial. So I get my two brackets, put an x in each. I've now got to find two numbers that multiply to 20 and add to 9. So they are, of course, positive 4 and positive 5. Because these two brackets are different, I will now get two solutions. So that's step 2 done, I've factorized. So step 3 is use the null factor law. So either the first bracket is, first thing is equal to 0, which means, of course, that x is equal to minus 4. Or the second thing is equal to 0. And if x plus 5 equals 0, that's a linear equation. Just subtract 5 from both sides. So they are the two solutions to this equation. If I substitute x is minus 4, I will make this here a true statement. If I substitute x is minus 5, I will make that a true statement. And you can substitute x is minus 4 or x is minus 5 on your calculator if you don't believe me. Let's look at a couple more examples. So what if I had something like this? 4x squared plus 20x is equal to 0. Okay, this is a binomial now. There's only two terms, but the way I solve it is going to be the same as I solved the previous questions. One side is equal to 0, already done. Second step, factorize. So remember, for binomials, when we factorize them, it's either highest common factor, difference of two squares, or both. This is certainly not the difference of two squares. I'm going to use highest common factor. Okay, so we should be able to factorize nice and quickly now. So now I have the situation, either the first thing is equal to 0, if 4x is equal to 0, x will be equal to 0, or the second thing is equal to 0. And again, that would mean x is minus 5. So they are the two solutions to this equation. If I substitute x equals 0 into this, I get a true statement. So let's just look at that. So if I go 4 times x squared plus 20 times x, I do get 0. That's right. If I substitute x is minus 5, I get 4 times, so negative 5 squared is positive 25 plus 20 times negative 5. And that does equal 0. That's why 0 and 5 are the solutions. If I substitute anything else in there, like x is 1, so if x is 1, I'd get 4 times 1 squared plus 20 times 1. Well, that certainly doesn't equal 0. So that would be wrong solution. So there are never more than two solutions. We found the two, we're done. Let's look at one involving difference of two squares. So let's say we had x squared minus 25 equals 0. I should point out, this one you could use the sort of the same process as linear equation, but I'm going to do it the same way I've done the other ones just to avoid confusion. So one side is equal to 0, done. Second step, factorize difference of two squares. So hopefully you recognize this. Square root of x squared, square root of 25. One gets a plus, one gets a minus. So either the first thing equals 0 or the second thing equals 0, in which case we get x equals 5. So minus 5 and positive 5 are the two solutions to this equation. So please, again, don't try and use methods from term 1 to solve these quadratics. Just follow the steps. Make one side equal to 0 if it's not already. Factorize, use the null factor law. This has been the luckiest maths teacher in the world. Have a great day.